The schools are nearly starting again in many countries around the world. The summer holidays are over. So in episode 152, it's time to get organized for the kids to go back to school.
You're listening to the Declutter Hub podcast, bringing you tried and tested, no-nonsense tips and advice from the leading experts in decluttering and organising your home. Now here are your hosts, Ingrid Jansen and Leslie Spellman.
Hello and welcome, listeners. I'm Ingrid.
And I'm Leslie.
If you have been listening for a while to our podcast, thank you so much for being here. And if you're a brand new listener, thanks for being here. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our weekly podcast. Leslie, we are talking about back to school organizing. Can you believe it's end of August? Oh, my word, the summer is over.
Well, I'm not going to lie, Ingrid, but it's a bit sad because this is my first year in how many would that be? 20 something years of no child going back to school. I have no school age children anymore. So I'm feeling a little bit bereft doing this podcast because I don't need to do any back to school organizing.
No, you've got whole other organizing to do, and that's uni organizing. We need to do a podcast about that at some point as well, Leslie. But yes, I feel your pain.
I know, but I know what it's like to organise for back to school. So I still feel I'm connected. So I still feel like even though I've not got a school-age child anymore, I can still add to this podcast.
Oh, of course. Now, it does feel, September always feels a bit like January, doesn't it?
Yeah, for many countries, we have just had our summer holidays. And so apologies if you're in the Southern Hemisphere and you don't have your summer holidays and you're still waiting for that. But if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, typically your kids will at some point over the next few weeks or maybe already have gone back to school. And that involves a fresh new start. And we feel like it's almost like New Year again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also because it kind of feels like the year then runs from September to July, doesn't it? Well, of course, we all know it's from January to December, but it feels kind of like a fresh start. We've all been out of our routines, and now all of a sudden we have to kind of wake up early again. We need to get kids out of the door. Kids need to we need to drop them off, or we need to put them on school buses, or they need to take the bus themselves. They need to get up early, and we need to get them out of bed and ready and with all their stuff.
So yeah, it's time for routines again. And even before we get there, we have to do some shopping. Now, Ingrid, we all know that you're not a shopper. Generally, you do not like shopping. But I'm pretty sure this is one time of the year that you have to do some shopping for new school supplies, new uniform and so on. So let's talk about shopping.
Yes. I mean, of course, what I normally do is actually, it's interesting because when the kids break up in July, I kind of make sure that then at that time, everything gets washed and everything gets ironed and everything is kind of ready to go. But most kids just do a growth spurt over the summer. I don't know what happens. They just suddenly decide to grow. So before they go back to school, I always make sure that I kind of let them try on the clothes, the shoes, the coats, the plimsolls, the football boots, and the whole kind of kit that goes with it when kids go to school here, the PE kits for sports. Everything needs to be tried on. So a list needs to be created. What do we need to buy? And especially because, of course, the kids go to school here in school uniform. You can't just go to any random shop. You need to go to the school uniform shop. And that is a whole trip in itself. It's not as easy as it sounds because you kind of these days have to make appointments or stand in a queue, or because everybody goes to the same shop at the same time of year, don't they?
I know. I mean, some of the uniform you can get from standard shops, can't you? But there are specialist items that need to come from the school uniform shop. I bet there's loads of people around the world with what is this thing called school uniform that find it all quite strange and archaic. But we love a school uniform here, don't we? Because it makes things so much easier. Apart from queuing at the school uniform shop, you're absolutely right. That is the kind of, we've got to do that whole school uniform shopping thing. But anyway, so I'm glad that I don't have to do that anymore. I'm kind of glad. I'm kind of bereft and sad. But anyway, so School uniform shop absolutely needs to be put in there, and we need to schedule that because it's typically difficult to get there, to get an appointment. We definitely need to put that in our diary ahead of time. Exactly the same goes for shoes as well, because again, we typically for school want to put our kids in some good quality shoes. We have certain shops in this country where we can get those shoes, but everybody goes to those shops as well. So it is nothing short of complete mayhem if you leave that to the last minute. It's literally, you've never seen so many last minute people. They'll be swarming around in Clark's, which is our sort of typical school shoe place, and it's crazy. You have to take a ticket. You have to sit there. You have to wait. It's madness, isn't it? Absolute madness. So the best thing to do is to go there early and not leave it to the last minute, which quite often, to be fair, is what I have done in the past. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, school shoes, I'm relatively okay. My problem is to find football boots. So here, the kids in secondary school, they have like their sports lessons, and a lot of the lessons are football, which my son doesn't necessarily like. He's very musical, but he's not very sporty. So a lot of the boys here have their football boots ready because they go in to play football every weekend. But for me, finding football boots, because my son's feet are really wide and they're quite long now, but they're still very wide. Nightmare. So I have to go to Sports Direct, and it's like talking about mayhem, Leslie.
You're completely out of your comfort zone in the football boot shop. So these are just things that you need to think about in advance, really. You need to think, right, what sports equipment do they need? This can be mouth guards, it can be football boots, it can be all manner of things, and shin pads. We really need to think that through, what that is ahead of time, don't we?
Yes, and of course, we also need to have the sports bags and the sport kits, because the kids here need to have shorts, and they need to have jogging bottoms, they need to have certain tops. So we need to get all that stuff ready. And now, of course, they need to have masks and sanitizer with them. And there's a whole list of things that kids need to bring to school. And also, they need to have a lunchbox if they bring their packed lunch with them. Loads of schools offer lunches. You can buy them. The kids can do that. My kids rather have lunch boxes because we have a warm meal here at home in the evening. So they're like, no, I'd rather bring a lunch box and get sorted like that. But that kind of stuff it gets a bit knackered. It gets a bit broken. You need to make sure that it's all in good condition when they start the school year, I think.
You know how I said I was getting really sad? Well, I totally am not now. Having to think about all those things is like making me really stressed out. I'm so glad that I don't have that in my life anymore. So I'm like, over to you now. I don't have to worry about that. One of the things that was always used to drive me incessantly crazy is this idea that every year they would get like a new stationery set. And so like the one from the year before wasn't good enough. And so you would get new stationery, a new pencil case, new erasers and pens and pencils and rulers and compasses and all that kind of stuff. And so we had to traipse off to the shop and get new stuff. And so it's an interesting one. We're actually going to talk about stationery next week, aren't we? Decluttering stationery. And a lot of the stationery that we're going to talk about is from exactly this, because we get too many, because our kids insist that they get new stationery every year. And so it's like, as a declutterer, it was always something that drove me completely crazy. But it's kind of hard because peer pressure means you don't want your child to be the one then that doesn't have the new stuff. It's just all crazy. But anyway, so yes, stationery and school supplies seem to be something that the kids really look forward to buying, particularly when they're really young as well.
Yeah.
So we need to factor that in as well, don't we?
Yeah, and I think also the school bag itself, Leslie. I mean, when they go to secondary school, it's all a bit more like a black rucksack. But I think when they're little, they're so excited, bless their little hearts, about the school bag they're going to bring into school and the keychain that they're going to hang on it, or the 12 keychains they're going to hang on it. I mean, they love that kind of thing. And a water bottle is a big thing as well. Some of them have them from the school with the school name on it. In secondary school, you can normally bring your own one. But kind of after a year of use, you're going to think, where's this water bottle been? Let's just get a new one now. Let's get a new one, kids. But it involves shopping and getting your list together, isn't it? And reviewing what you still have, what needs replacing. And of course, then we need to talk about school planners. Some of the schools provide them themselves, other schools don't. So you need to then buy a school planner. Lots of things going on.
There are lots of things. And of course, these things are not rocket science. And obviously, we've talked a little bit about school uniform. It's the same. Even if your kid's not wearing school uniform, you're still going to have certain clothes that they're typically going to wear for school. So it's the same whether it's uniform or not. The school supplies, the sports kit, all of that is part of every school child around the world, isn't it? Now, one thing, because I bet you really like doing this. I just know already before we even discuss it, I bet you really like doing sticky back plastic on books, don't you?
Yes.
I knew that you would. How did I know that you would? You totally would like that. Like, what is wrong with you? It was the bane of my life. So sticky back plastic. So I presume this happens all around the world. I mean, my kids went to school in America for a while. And I have to say, I can't remember doing sticky back plastic on their books when they were in the States, but maybe they'd not got to that age because they were really little. So maybe they were still working with paper at that stage. But in case anybody doesn't know, in the UK, when they are given books, writing books to write, exercise books that they write in, they want those books to last a while. And so what we do in this country is we use sticky back plastic. And it's a nightmare. It's much better than it was. When I was growing up in the 80s, literally you would get bubbles in everything, wouldn't you? And it's just, once it was down, it was stuck and it wasn't coming off. Now it's kind of changed a little bit. So you can kind of take it off and put it back on again until you don't have any kind of bubbles in it, can't you? But back in the 80s, when I was at school, sticky back plastic was the bane of my life.
It's interesting because I just only thought this was a Dutch thing, because I remember my mum helping me in my first year when I went to secondary school, helping me put my kind of this sticky back plastic on my books, because we had to buy like our syllabus ourselves. So we had a whole package of books that we used for like our different topics, and we had to buy that as a package because school is much cheaper in the Netherlands, but you have to buy your books yourself. And I remember putting sticky back plastic. So my mum told me the knack of how to do it. And it just, ever since then, a ruler, some sharp scissors, and Bob's your uncle. But it's one of those things you have to be quite meticulous for, I think. And maybe that's because of why I like it. I like that kind of job to do. So the kids, when their kids came home with their books, I was like, yeah, give it to me. Give it to mama. I'm ready to do this job. I love this job.
It's like things like I'm not really very good in that parenting kind of role where you have to sew badges on or any of those things. I'll be like, no, I really, really don't want to do that. You would imagine that I would, but I'm so not like that. I need to go back, Ingrid, and I'm sure a lot of people are like, when you say school is cheaper in the Netherlands, what do you mean by that? It's free. Unless you're going to a private school and then you've got to pay. What do you mean school's cheaper in the Netherlands?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I got confused like for university. But of course, we're talking about...
You're not putting sticky back plastic on when you're at university, are you?
No.
I was like, well, you've got to pay to go to school in Holland.
No. But you only pay, but you pay for your books. Yeah, that is true.
But
yeah.
you do pay for your books.
Yes, you pay for your books, but you keep them and you have them at home. And so they give you a whole book list that you have to then order.
Right.
And then you keep them at home. So like here, all the books, the syllabus are all in the classes, aren't they? But I mean, it's all different now. They do so much more online. We never had that. I remember I had IT in my last year of secondary school, these massive computers, and we were learning how to type on the computers, like when the screens were still green, Leslie. That's how old I am, honestly.
I know. Well, I'm older than you, so we're not even going to talk about that. Hi, just a short break from this week's podcast episode to tell you about our discovery calls. Maybe you aren't sure if a membership or a course is quite for you, or you would like to know exactly how our membership or courses work. You're going to have so many questions, which is completely understandable. So why don't we hop onto a discovery call so you can ask away? It's just a 15-minute call and it's completely free. No catch, just a simple chat with Ingrid or I. Find out more on declutterhub.com/discovery.
So welcome back. And let's talk about organization. we've talked about the stuff a lot, but we need to organize ourselves, don't we, Leslie?
Yeah, organise. So we talked about it being a fresh year. And so it's always a good idea, isn't it, to start afresh and to think, right, how can I take out the most stressful time in any parent's life, which is trying to get out to school in the morning? So how can I make that better so that everyone is not screaming at each other? We're not running out the door with 2 minutes to spare. We're not late. How is that all going to happen? Have you got any handy hints and tips, Ingrid, for us as to how we can make that smoother?
Well, I think first of all, I think you need to think about yourself as, are you a morning person? I think that's where it starts. I mean, if you know that you're not a morning person, you might just want to say, okay, I need to make sure that everything is ready to go the evening before. I need to know where everybody's bags are, where their coats are, where their shoes are, where their homework is. Do I need to already kind of get the lunch boxes ready and washed? So I only have to fill in the water, put in a sandwich, and then you're ready to go in the morning, instead of trying to scramble it all before 2 minutes before you need to leave the door. So you need to probably create a space somewhere. Where is kind of your space where all that stuff lives, or that you create hooks. This is where the coats go. This is where the shoes go for that person, go under that coat. This is where the bags go. This is where the PE bags go. It needs to live somewhere, because the problem is, if it doesn't live somewhere, it gets dropped somewhere, and then it gets mislaid, and then there's panic. Where are my shoes? Where's my PE bag? I can't find my water bottle. Where's my hand sanitizer? I've lost my mask, and all of that kind of thing. And that's what you don't want. So you need to create a space where this stuff lives. And it doesn't all have to live in one place, but it has to be in a place.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you talk about being a morning person and things like that. And of course, if you are that person that gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning, well, I can't even imagine doing that when you've got young kids. But anyway, if you are, good luck with that. I've never, ever done that. But we all know that things happen, don't they, with kids that you haven't bargained for. One of your kids is sick, something happens, you get a phone call. And so it is a really good idea to do that preparation the night before, just so that you can avert these problems in the morning. So that's a really, really good idea to do that. And also useful that Ingrid's talked about having a spot somewhere for things. And so I think that we would really call that a command center. So it's kind of a fancy term, isn't it? A command center. We have done a podcast episode on what is a command center. So we'll go into that in more details in that podcast if you want to listen in. It's episode 21. So that's all. A command center is literally where you would have everything to do with school. You would have homework, you would have timetables, letters from school, all those kind of things might be in your command center. You might incorporate within your command center hooks for things like football boots or bags or planners, all of those kind of things, homework. They can all go into a command center depending on how much space you've got. So that's always a really good idea. But even if you can't have something as fancy as a command center, you need to know where these things are so you're not scrabbling around for them, as Ingrid says.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about the holiday schedule as well, because you said we need a place where we can put schedules and things. I think what I used to do right before they started school, I would go to the school website, look up for term dates and kind of go, okay, what are the term dates? So I wouldn't wait until kind of like it was when I started to think, oh, I think there's a holiday coming up, or they might have a day off. No, I would have the term dates printed off at the time. Now I just put them directly into my digital calendar. So I have that scheduled. What's the starting date? What's the end date? When are the inset days? When are they off? Do they overlap at all? Or does one child have another day than another? Do I need to sort something out? So you can then start to plan ahead a little bit of possibly holiday clubs that need booking, or maybe a weekend away that you can do, or oh, wow, one kid has a whole week off while the other is in school. What am I going to do? I need to sort anything for that? So you can start to think and plan ahead a little bit further than just it's Monday morning and this week will end on Friday. And I'm all flustered, because you know what's coming up. And they normally give you term dates really well in advance, this year, and sometimes even also the next year as well. So you can actually really have an idea of what is going on, especially if they're in different schools.
Yeah, I don't know what happens at your school then, Ingrid, if they're still sending those dates out and you still got to go. But I subscribe to a calendar, so our school has a calendar that you subscribe to, and it drops everything in. So you don't even need to transfer those dates; you just subscribe to the calendar itself.
Okay.
School. So that's certainly something to look out for, because a lot of the schools probably do have that, and they drop everything in, and so you've got everything in one spot, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another thing that I was always really rubbish at, which is I don't know why I'm a professional organizer, really, because I was just so rubbish at all these. I think it's just like parental type things that I wasn't very good at. I mean, I did the right things, but this kind of, all this really good mum type stuff, like labeling and sewing things on, and I just was generally quite rubbish about that, making packed lunches. My kids were talking last week and they were like, well, we were told when we were 7 years old, if we wanted packed lunches, we had to make them ourselves. I was like, and that's the truth. It's the truth. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing 3 extra packed lunches. If you want packed lunch, you've got to get up and make them yourself. How mean is that, looking back? And these kids remember it. They remember, and they tell you this stuff when they're in the 20s, as if they've been... bro, it's terrible, really. But anyway, so yeah, was not a good parent in those regards. I was okay. quite happy with a lot of things that I've done, but this kind of stuff, struggling, including sewing labels onto clothes. Now, I bet you sew a label in, don't you?
Well, I outsource this to my husband.
Oh, yeah. So you've got Jan as well. So you would be taking all the glory and saying, I'm a really good mum because I get all those things, and actually telling your husband to do that. The chances of me getting my husband to do any labeling of any kind, like no chance. But I would always look for the pen, like in this country, because of school uniform, quite often there's labeling. I think it's probably all around the world that people label stuff for the kids because you're going to lose them at school. But I would always do the pen where you just write it on, and that's way easier than sewing in labels into 20.
Yeah, we've never done sewing. That's far too much. No, we did the ironing with like the damn cloth. You can iron there. You can put like a name on a little sticker, and then that's what we do. Sewing is way beyond. No.
Oh, that's good. That makes me happy. Sewing is beyond your capabilities as like super mum. Super professional organizer. Anyway, so labeling, if you have to label your kids' clothes, sew them in, iron them on, write the names in, it really will save you a lot of time in the long run, despite what we say about being rubbish at it. They did have a label in their clothes somehow, no idea how. I probably made them do it themselves. And so, yeah, that's something that you need to think about in advance, and make sure you've got those labels in advance, because obviously there's always a big rush towards the beginning of school. So think that through. And then the final thing that we wanted to talk about is making sure that if like me, you're that terrible mother who said, if you want to pack lunch, you've got to make it yourself, and they have school lunches, then you need to put money in their account. Now, nowadays at schools, it's mostly money on their finger. So it's kind of like they tap in with their finger or whatever, and it's a parent pay type account. And so you need to make sure that the money's gone in there. I have mine, make sure you look at the amounts. And so, there comes a point where these kids are like buying whatever they want. And so I put what's the word? A limit, that's the word. I put a limit so they can't spend too much in a day. Otherwise they would have 75 fizzy drinks before I know it, and it would charge me £20 a day. And so I make sure there's a limit on that. So look at what's possible and what feels right for you with your child as well, and do that well in advance. And I have it on recurring payments as well, so I don't have to keep topping it up manually, so that when it's about to run out, it will auto top up, which is also quite useful and saves time and energy.
Yeah, and I think so. I think the main thing is, I think it's a big change, especially when they go from primary to secondary, because we all can we get set in our ways. We know how to do things. And then suddenly they go secondary, they get a lot more they want to do stuff themselves. But there's a lot of paperwork that suddenly needs to, especially in that summer when they do that big switch to big school, a lot of paperwork to sort out, a lot of forms to fill in, a lot of new rules and things. It takes time to prepare for that. It takes time to do that. And of course, the one thing that we haven't really talked about yet is also homework. I mean, they do get some homework when they're little, but it really starts to step up when they're in secondary school, right? And of course, you need to decide are they going to do their homework? Are they going to get a laptop or a computer or a tablet? Can you sort that out? Can the school provide one? Is it all still very paper-based? Do they need to have maybe a homework spot with some supplies? Or is that now really getting old-fashioned? And when my kids roll their eyes, they're like, we've got Google Classroom, especially, of course, now in the last year, so much has changed and so much has gone online that we never even 2 years ago thought was possible. But they now do everything on Google Classroom. They scan things, they watch things, they send them YouTube videos, they fill in the forms online. It's just all really changed a lot, hasn't it?
It has, it really has. And so I know, Ingrid, that you had a top tip, didn't you?
Yes, especially if you go away on holiday quite late in the summer. So we've got 6 weeks here during the summer. So if you decide to go on holiday kind of at the end of August, and you've got like 1 or 2 days when you come back before the kids have to start back, you might want to organize yourself before you go on holiday. First of all, probably the shops will be a lot quieter because everybody's still on holiday and not even thinking about going back to school, but also because you're going to run out of time the second you come back. And then there's just not enough time to get everything organized.
And I think also quite often for things like school uniform or school supplies, that's when the sales are on. So sales are typically on in July, whereas, by the end of August, when people are getting desperate, then the sales seem to have disappeared. So it's good to shop early for these things if you know you've got to get them.
Yeah.
So Ingrid, back to school. That's you. Good luck with that. I do not need to do that, but I do have to take my child to university in a few weeks. And we are going to talk about that on the podcast, aren't we?
And I'm glad. I need to learn from you, Leslie. I am blissfully unaware still everything that needs to happen when children go to university. So I feel like I'm getting like a course on how to pack your kids off to uni in a couple of weeks' time. But first of all, next week, Leslie, we are indeed going to talk about the 10 things you need to declutter from your stationery. So that is what's coming up. I thank you all so much for listening and for being with us today. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to the Declutter Hub podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us in your podcast player so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you next week.